Okay, unlike the quiz that you've taken, we sympathize 100% with CLEO, the protagonist of Roma. But I would like to point out that one of her main characteristics, silence, the way she doesn't speak, and she's largely silent as a character, that quality or trait has been interpreted differently by the critics and by students of Roma. And the basic contrast is that silence is interpreted as a sign of her own oppression, or silence is interpreted as a symbol of her strength and resilience in the face of adversity. I will add here too that a reductionist, very dangerous, really, reductionist take on CLEO has been a super ugly backlash in the media of the actress herself, the actress being of indigenous background and who was a recipient of very ugly racist diatribes about her portrayal of CLEO. Now, I'm pointing this out because those commentaries are not scholarship. Those are not scholarship, they're simply reactionist. So what we aim to do is learn how to examine a character, especially a complex character, and how to examine a character with objectivity. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. So what we need to do is we need to examine how the character is represented. And if we look at this list of CLEO's identities, and it's not an exhaustive list, so we could add more identities to this list, but we're not going to analyze the identities exactly. We're going to analyze how the identities are represented and how they are constructed on the screen for us, the viewers. And in this case, if these identities define her, then we can start to ask questions like, okay, they define her, these identities define her, but how do they limit or free her in the society, right, in the economy in which she lives? And as you're doing your work, going back to the first slide and this different way that silence has been interpreted, absolutely feel free to agree or disagree with critics as part of your thesis statement, as part of your introduction, as a way of developing your own perspective. And in developing your own perspective, you might consider examining another character altogether. Now, CLEO has been studied widely, but the other characters in Roma really have not been studied. And so there's an opportunity there for you to make an original academic contribution to the film's interpretations. So moving on to Sophia as an example of one of the characters in Roma that we may not sympathize with, we may not hold much empathy for Sophia. Notice that it's unsuccessful to state, I don't like Sophia. That's not a thesis statement. Successful theses, which I won't read, but you can see them. You notice that one does empathize with Sophia, the last one, but the middle thesis there, which is successful, does not offer a shred of empathy for Sophia. And in fact, it might be easier to choose a character you don't empathize with. So what would be the next step? You take one of these successful theses. You're going to need to add one or two examples from the film's story. Again, you're not going to choose identities. Sophia's a white, upper middle class woman. Well, that doesn't really prove your thesis. What proves your thesis is how being in that role, right, shaped, constructed Sophia's behaviors, maybe her racist behaviors, maybe her self-centered behaviors, and so you're going to show how she's represented, right? And once you cite some examples from the story, then it's time to cite some examples from secondary sources. And when we do that in the humanities, we call them lenses, and we use a lot of lenses, like taking a magnifying glass to the character and turning the character around and examining that character from all sides with your magnifying glass as you apply different lenses to maybe a feminist lens, maybe race studies, maybe economic theory. And this is how we come up with a complex understanding of the character. So in the next module, I will speak explicitly about finding and using secondary sources.